You've got to be kidding me. I threw the letter down on the kitchen table, staring at Rachel Carter, the HOA president. She was standing there, clipboard in hand, as if she'd just handed me a receipt for my life. I've had this flagpole for over 30 years, and now you're telling me it's an eyesore? Rachel didn't flinch. Her lip curled into a tight, professional smile, the kind you'd expect from someone who relished power. It's not just about the flagpole, Jack. It's about the rules, the community's aesthetic guidelines. We can't allow deviations. I took a breath, fighting the urge to raise my voice. I'm sorry, did you miss the part where that flagpole was put up by my grandfather, the same man who fought for this country, who served overseas in 2 wars? My pulse quickened, but I kept it in check. I wasn't about to let her bulldoze over me, not on this. That's not relevant here, she snapped, not even glancing at the framed photos of my grandfather hanging on the wall. She was looking at the flagpole from the window. The proud, worn fabric fluttering in the early morning breeze seemed almost a challenge to her. The rules are clear. The HOA has the final say. That's why it's a $4,200 0 fine. My mind was racing. How had we gone from a casual neighborhood to this kind of tension? And why was she targeting me? It wasn't just a flag. It wasn't even just a fine. It was everything my grandfather had left behind. His sacrifice, his pride, his legacy. I folded my arms, calm but firm. You're not going to win this fight, Rachel. I don't care how many rules you have on that piece of paper. I own this land, and I own that flagpole. My grandfather fought for the freedoms you seem so quick to disregard. You're messing with the wrong person. I watched her eyes flicker, just for a second, a sign of doubt, but she quickly masked it with that same cold corporate expression. We'll see about that. My jaw tightened. We will. As she walked out, I stood there staring at the flagpole. A gift from a man who never asked for much, but who always gave everything. The flag rippled in the breeze, a reminder of the battle ahead. I didn't want to fight, but damn it, I wasn't about to let this stand. And it wasn't just the flag. It was everything that came with it. The house, the memories, the history. These weren't just bricks and mortar. This was my family's legacy. Where are you watching from? What's the one thing you'd fight for if someone tried to take it away? Drop a comment below and don't forget to subscribe for more. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. I didn't sleep much that night. How could I? The thought of Rachel Carter and her HOA committee, their rules, their control, lingered in my head like a bad taste. But morning came and the fight continued. I tried to push it aside, tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Rachel had made it personal, and now it was my turn to do the same. I was sitting at my desk when the next letter came. I saw it on the kitchen counter, a thin envelope with the HOA's logo stamped in bold black ink. I picked it up slowly, as if I were reading the first line of a letter from an old enemy. I knew what it would say before I even opened it, but I opened it anyway. Your appeal has been denied. The flagpole remains in violation of our community guidelines. $4,200, 0 cents. The number burned into my mind. It wasn't just a fine, it was a message, a statement. Rachel wasn't going to stop until she broke me, until she forced me to bow to her will. But she didn't know who she was dealing with. I grabbed my coat and headed out the door. The flagpole was still standing tall, a defiant symbol of my grandfather's legacy. I couldn't let them take that away. But I needed more than just anger. I needed a plan. I drove down to the local library and spent hours combing through zoning laws and property rights. The more I dug, the clearer it became. The HOA had power, sure, but they didn't have absolute power. Not where my grandfather's flagpole was concerned. Not where my family's history was concerned. When I finally walked back into the house, my mind was made up. I wasn't going to let this go. I'd fight, and I'd fight smart. I wasn't alone in this either. The neighbors, well, some of them had started to notice. A few had stopped by while I was out back tending to the garden, asking questions. I could tell they were hesitant, afraid of getting caught in the crossfire. One man, Tony, from 2 doors down, hesitated before finally speaking up. "You know, Jack," he said, his voice low, "I saw Rachel's little notice on your lawn. People around here, they talk. But, well, I don't know if anyone has the guts to speak up. You might want to think about just paying the fine, man. Keep things quiet. I looked at him, trying not to let the frustration show. And let them take everything I care about? This flagpole's been here longer than any of us. It's a piece of my family's history. I'm not just going to roll over. Tony shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting toward the sidewalk. I hear you, Jack. I really do. But you know how they are. If you fight back, it could get ugly. I stepped closer, my tone firm but calm. Then I guess it's time to get ugly. Tony backed off, raising his hands in surrender. He didn't need to be convinced. He just didn't have the stomach for a fight. And that was fine. I wasn't doing this for him. I turned and walked back into the house, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in this battle. The weight of the HOA's influence might be strong, but I could see cracks beginning to form. Maybe it was the quiet whispers from the neighbors, the subtle glances, or maybe it was just the weight of the fight pressing down on me. By the time I sat down to dinner, I had a few plans brewing. I wasn't about to give Rachel the satisfaction of making me feel powerless. I'd consult with a lawyer, dig deeper into the HOA's bylaws, and find every little legal loophole I could. This wasn't just about the flag anymore. It was about standing my ground. And if it meant going toe-to-toe with Rachel and the HOA, then so be it. As the evening wore on, I thought about my grandfather. He'd fought battles no one could understand, fought for a country that sometimes seemed to forget what it stood for. And now, here I was, fighting for something even more personal. The flagpole, the legacy, the family. The fine didn't matter. What mattered was that I had a reason to fight, and that reason would see me through this, no matter how dirty the fight got. The sun was just starting to dip below the horizon when I saw Lena again. She was walking her dog along the street, her eyes never quite meeting mine. The silence between us felt heavy, like a conversation that was supposed to happen, but hadn't. I stood by the flagpole, trying to calm my thoughts, trying to ignore the gnawing frustration that had become my constant companion. Lena stopped a few feet away, hesitated for a second, then shifted her gaze to the ground. I saw Rachel again today, she muttered, almost too quietly for me to hear. I straightened up, trying to mask my irritation. Yeah? What'd she say this time? Give you a lecture about community rules? Lena shrugged, pulling her dog along. Same old. That your flagpole is an eyesore, like she's been saying, but you know... She trailed off, looking over her shoulder as if making sure no one was listening. I didn't wait for her to finish. But what? My voice came out a little sharper than I meant it to. She took a deep breath, a slight tremble in her hands as she tugged on the dog's leash. I don't know. I think I'm starting to see things a little differently. She met my eyes for the first time that day, her expression guarded but searching. Jack, I've been here a long time. I know how things work around here. The HOA, they don't just stop at fines. They'll push until they get what they want. And Rachel, she's not someone you want to mess with. I crossed my arms. I'm not looking to mess with her, Lena. I'm standing up for my family, for my grandfather. That flagpole means something. It's not just a decoration, and Rachel's not going to push me around. She gave a small, quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. I know, Jack, I know, but sometimes it's easier to keep quiet, to just let it go and let them have their way. I took a step closer, my voice low. You think I should just give up, let them walk all over me? Lena's eyes softened. She was silent for a moment before speaking again. No, but I've seen what happens when you push back too hard. People get hurt. Things get messy. I felt the sting of her words, but I wasn't about to back down. You've seen what happens when people do nothing too, right? It's not just about a flagpole, Lena. It's about them taking control. What happens next? Maybe they'll come after your garden or your front door, or hell, maybe they'll fine you for your dog's collar being too flashy. She didn't respond immediately, but I saw the flicker of something behind her eyes. Regret, maybe? Or guilt? Jack, she started slowly, I used to do legal work. You might not know this, but I handled a lot of property disputes for clients. I saw things that never made it to the headlines. But I know a thing or two about how the system works, and Rachel's not going to stop until she gets what she wants. She paused, looking at me as if considering whether to continue. You've got to be careful. You need to know what you're up against. I nodded slowly, digesting her words. She wasn't just a neighbor. Lena had experience. Real experience. I didn't know why she'd been so quiet all this time, why she'd stayed out of the drama, but now I understood. It wasn't just fear. It was wisdom. I'm not backing down. I said firmly, making sure she knew where I stood. I'm not letting them take this from me, and if Rachel's going to keep pushing, then I'll fight back the right way. Lena gave me a long look, her expression unreadable. You're right, Jack. It's not just a flagpole. I see that now. I could tell she wasn't ready to join the fight. Not yet, at least. But I knew something had shifted. There was a moment, just then, when I saw the first cracks in her resolve. And maybe, just maybe, she'd start to see things the way I did. Thanks, I said, turning back to the flagpole. You know where to find me if you change your mind. She gave me a small nod, her lips pressed together tightly. She didn't say anything else as she walked away, but I could tell her mind was already spinning, already considering what I'd said. As I stood there, watching her disappear around the corner, I felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. The fight was only just beginning, but for the first time I wasn't alone in this. Lena knew. She knew exactly what the HOA was capable of, and maybe, just maybe, she'd be there when the real fight started. Where do you stand in a fight like this? Would you let them take something that's been passed down for generations? Or would you stand up and fight back? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure you subscribe for more as the battle heats up. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. It didn't take long for Rachel to escalate things. That next week, I woke up to another letter. This time, it wasn't just the fine for the flagpole, it was a warning. Failure to comply will result in further legal action. It felt like a slap to the face. I tossed the letter onto the kitchen table. It wasn't even 7 a.m., and already it felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. They weren't just pushing for the flagpole anymore. They were pushing to control everything. I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to keep calm, but my hands were shaking. I grabbed my coat and headed outside, pacing back and forth in front of the flagpole. The cold wind bit at my skin, but I didn't care. My mind was racing, calculating the next move, the next step. They thought they could bully me into submission, but they were wrong. That's when Tony from 2 doors down walked past, glancing over at me with an uneasy look. Jack, man, you okay? I stopped pacing and shot him a tight smile, trying to keep the frustration in check. Yeah, just thinking about how I'm going to handle this. Tony hesitated. Look, man, I told you before, Rachel's not going to back down. You're not just fighting her. You're fighting the whole damn neighborhood. People talk. They don't like trouble. I leaned against the fence, forcing myself to stay calm. And that's the problem, Tony. People like you, like everyone around here. Nobody's willing to stand up to her. Well, I am. His eyes flickered nervously. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but then just shook his head. Man, you don't get it. These people, they don't care about you or your flagpole. They care about peace. They care about not having their names on the HOA's radar. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. And that's exactly the problem. They want peace, but they're okay letting Rachel run everything from her little throne. That flagpole is part of my history, my family's history, and I'm not just going to let them take that from me. Tony gave me one last look, then muttered, I hope you know what you're doing, before turning and walking away. I watched him go, a sinking feeling settling in my stomach. He wasn't wrong. People around here didn't want to make waves. But I wasn't going to be quiet, not now, not when it mattered most. The next day, I made an appointment with a lawyer. I wasn't going to sit back and let Rachel bulldoze me with empty threats. The law was on my side, and I was going to fight back with every resource I had. The lawyer's office was downtown, a short drive from my house, but it felt like the longest drive of my life. As I sat in the waiting room, my mind was whirling, calculating every move. When I finally stepped into the lawyer's office, I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't that I had everything figured out, it was that I finally had a plan. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Clara, sat across from me, flipping through papers. She didn't waste any time with small talk. I've looked over the HOA's bylaws and your documents. This fine they're pushing, it's bogus. They have no right to demand you remove that flagpole. The issue is whether you want to escalate this to court or find a more subtle way to handle it. I leaned forward. I'm not backing down. I want to go to court if it comes to that. But I want to be sure I'm ready. I need to understand what we're up against. Clara nodded, making a note on her pad. I'll get you the specifics, but the important thing is that the HOA's actions could be seen as harassment. They're targeting you for something that's been in place for decades, and they don't have a leg to stand on legally. If it goes to court, they'll be on the defensive. I felt a surge of relief, but it was fleeting. I couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel was only going to double down now. She wasn't someone who took kindly to losing. I left the lawyer's office feeling a little lighter, but also more determined. I wasn't just fighting for a flagpole anymore. I was fighting for my dignity, for my right to live without being dictated to by people who thought they could control everything. The next few days felt like a blur. Emails, phone calls, and late-night research. I gathered every scrap of evidence I could find, every document that would prove the HOA was wrong. But still, the constant pressure from the neighbors, the looks from people who would rather turn a blind eye than get involved, hung over me like a storm cloud. They didn't know what it was like, the pressure to just give in, to let the HOA have its way. But I knew this wasn't just about me. It was about standing up for what was right, for what my grandfather had fought for. He didn't back down from a fight, and neither would I. By the time I was done for the night, my mind was exhausted, but the fire inside me was burning brighter than ever. I was ready for whatever came next. The days blurred together as the weight of the fight pressed down harder. I'd made my decision, I'd consulted the lawyer, and I'd gathered the evidence, but something kept nagging at me. There had to be more. Rachel wasn't going to just back down because of a few legal loopholes. No, I needed something that would hit her where it hurt. Something she couldn't ignore. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I had to keep digging. My grandfather had left behind a trove of old papers, keepsakes, and mementos that I'd shoved into boxes over the years. Stuff that had sentimental value, sure, but also, just as importantly, things that might hold a key to the legal battle I was about to wage. I hadn't looked through them in years, but something told me now was the time. That night, after dinner, I found myself climbing into the attic, a place I hadn't ventured in too long. The dusty old boxes stacked high against the rafters looked like a forgotten part of my past, and for a moment I almost turned back. But I didn't. I could feel my grandfather's presence up here. His old things, his life, still sitting in these boxes like it was waiting for me to rediscover them. I began pulling them down one by one, coughing as the dust swirled up in the dim light. Each box felt heavier than the last, like they were full of more than just paper. They were full of memories, of things I'd long buried, and with every item I uncovered, I could feel the pressure building. There were old letters from the war, pictures of my grandfather with men who'd long since passed, medals that had been tucked away and forgotten about, but nothing that felt like the breakthrough I needed. I was beginning to think maybe it was all just a pipe dream when I found it. An old folder. It was tucked behind a stack of worn leather-bound books, practically shoved into a corner. It wasn't marked, but something about it caught my eye. As soon as I pulled it out, I knew this was what I'd been searching for. I opened it slowly, careful not to damage whatever was inside, and there it was, an official-looking letter, stamped and signed by the state. It was the original permit for the flagpole, the one that had been issued to my grandfather back when he first installed it. The letter was a relic from decades ago, and yet it held the one thing I needed to win this fight. I felt my pulse quicken as I read through the contents. The permit clearly stated that the flagpole was authorized by the state, legal and unchallenged at the time. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the weapon I needed to force Rachel's hand. The sudden realization hit me. Rachel hadn't just been harassing me. She had been trying to erase a piece of my family's history, a history that was backed by the law. She didn't know what she'd been messing with. I sat there in the attic, holding that letter like it was the key to everything. I could almost feel my grandfather's presence there, as if he was telling me to keep fighting, to never give in. I took the letter downstairs and set it on the kitchen table, staring at it for a long time. It felt like a victory, but it was more than that. It was a declaration. I had the law on my side, and it was time to use it. As I sat there, I thought about Lena's words from the other day, how she'd warned me about pushing too hard, about the risk of getting in over my head. But I wasn't scared anymore. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't even about the flagpole anymore. This was about standing up for my family's legacy, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially Rachel, take that from me. The next morning, I called Clara, the lawyer. I could hear the surprise in her voice when I told her what I'd found. "You're kidding me," she said, her tone sharp. "This is exactly what we need. This permit gives us a solid foundation. They can't touch you now." "I know," I replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "But I'm not stopping here. I want this to go all the way. I want them to know they can't just pick on people like this." Clara agreed to start drafting the paperwork immediately, and as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that the tide was starting to turn in my favor. The discovery of the permit felt like a turning point. It wasn't just about winning the legal battle. It was about proving that I had a right to stand my ground. And for the first time in weeks, I finally felt like I was in control of the situation. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. As I looked out the window at the flagpole waving proudly in the wind, I knew this wasn't over, but I also knew I was ready for whatever came next. I couldn't help but smile as I walked back from the lawyer's office, that permit still clutched tightly in my hand. The weight of it felt different now. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a message. To Rachel, to the HOA, to everyone who thought they could run roughshod over my family's history. But as the legal steps piled up, I started to realize that I wasn't the only one who had a stake in this. Rachel wasn't just trying to knock me down. She was targeting everything my grandfather stood for. The flagpole wasn't just some decoration, it was a symbol of resilience. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deeply personal this fight had become. I was sitting on the porch when Lena came over. She wasn't walking her dog this time. She was here with purpose. Her expression was tight, serious. I could see she was working through something in her head, unsure if now was the right moment to speak up. "Jack," she started, pausing for a second before taking a seat next to me. "I've been thinking about what you said, about how this isn't just about the flagpole." I nodded. "Exactly. This isn't just some HOA violation. It's about standing up for something that matters. My family matters." Lena looked out at the flagpole, her gaze softening as if seeing it with new eyes. "I know, but I've been thinking." She hesitated again, and I could see the weight of it on her face. "I've been so caught up in my own fear of this place, of what might happen if I speak out, that I've ignored what's right in front of me." I turned to her, surprised by the shift in her tone. "What do you mean?" She sighed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I've been so afraid of crossing Rachel, of what the neighbors would think, of what would happen to my quiet life. But I see now that it's not just about me. It's about standing up for what matters." She paused, her voice quieter. "And I think it's time I helped you." I sat there for a moment, processing. Lena had always been this quiet, reserved figure in the neighborhood, not one to make waves, but now something had changed. She was finally ready to act. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with gratitude. "I didn't want to fight this alone." She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as though acknowledging the gravity of what was ahead. We sat in silence for a while, the wind rustling the leaves and the flag waving in the distance. It wasn't a victorious moment yet, but there was something different in the air. A shift, a quiet understanding between us. The battle wasn't just mine anymore. The following days were a whirlwind. With Lena on my side, we started putting together our case. We reviewed the legal documents again, making sure every detail lined up. Clara, the lawyer, was impressed with the depth of our preparation, and she began drafting the necessary legal filings. But Rachel wasn't going to go down without a fight. It didn't take long for her to retaliate. I got a call from Clara the morning after we filed our papers. "Jack, I don't know how to say this, but Rachel's pulled some strings. She's managed to delay your court date, citing some obscure zoning issue. We're going to have to dig deeper." The blood drained from my face. "What the hell is she trying to pull now?" Clara sighed. "She's playing dirty, Jack. We need to be ready. But I'm not backing down. We'll find a way to make this stick." As the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel was one step ahead of me. Her actions were getting more underhanded, and I began to wonder just how far she was willing to go to protect her grip on the neighborhood. It was more than just a flagpole to her. It was control. I spent late nights poring over city records, zoning laws, and HOA guidelines. It wasn't just about the permit anymore. It was about finding the cracks in her armor. The more I dug, the more I realized how far-reaching her influence was. Rachel had the power to manipulate the system, But the more I uncovered, the more I realized that the system had cracks of its own. By the end of the week, I had something, a lead, a piece of evidence that could break Rachel's hold on the neighborhood. It was a record of a similar case, where the HOA had overstepped its authority and been forced to pay compensation. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. This time, it wasn't just about the flagpole. It was about the community's right to stand up to her. I called Lena that night. I found something, I told her, my voice tense with excitement. This could change everything. Tell me, she said, her voice steady. It was clear she was ready for whatever came next. This is just the beginning, I said. We're not backing down now. Do you think Jack's found the edge he needed to win this fight, or is Rachel about to pull another fast one? What would you do if someone tried to take away something that mattered so much to your family? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more updates. You won't want to miss how this battle unfolds. The following days felt like a chess game, each move calculated, each piece slowly falling into place. I could feel the weight of the legal battle pressing down on me, but something about the way things were unfolding gave me a strange sense of power. Rachel wasn't going to get away with this, not this time. Lena had become an invaluable ally. She wasn't just offering moral support anymore. She was digging into records with me, pulling up past cases, studying every piece of information we had. Her legal background had been the missing piece I didn't even know I needed. Together, we were piecing together a strategy that would force Rachel's hand. The morning after I found the record of the HOA overstepping in another case, Lena and I met at the kitchen table, papers spread out before us like a battlefield. This could be it, I said, tapping the file in front of me. If we present this to Clara, it'll show a clear pattern of abuse. This is bigger than just me. Lena nodded, eyes focused on the document. Rachel's been using her position to manipulate the system. That's clear now. This case could be our leverage, but we have to make sure we're ready. We need something more than just paperwork. We need her to slip up, get her to make a mistake. I leaned back, chewing on the end of a pen. I've got an idea. Lena raised an eyebrow. What's the plan? You'll love this, I said with a half smile. I'm going to get Rachel to reveal herself. Make her admit she's been overstepping her bounds. If we can get her on record, even just in a casual conversation, we can use it against her. Lena's expression softened, and for the first time in days, I saw a hint of humor in her eyes. You're talking about setting a trap. Exactly. We're going to bait her. If she's as sure of herself as I think she is, she'll walk right into it. For the next few hours, we went over every possible scenario. I knew Rachel well enough by now to predict how she'd react if she thought she was winning. That's where I'd strike. I wasn't just going to throw her off guard. I was going to make her think she was in control, then watch her unravel. Later that week, I found myself in the neighborhood's community center, trying to act casual while I waited for Rachel to arrive. She was running the HOA meeting that evening, and I had a seat reserved at the back, hoping to get a few moments alone with her afterward. I'd rehearsed my lines, prepared for every possible reaction. It was all about playing the long game. As the meeting started, I noticed Rachel's usual arrogance, her sense of control, the way she looked down on anyone who dared challenge her. She didn't even glance at me when I walked in, but I could feel her eyes on me when I sat down. I took my seat, watching her with careful attention. She couldn't know what I was planning. After the meeting wrapped up, the room started to clear out. I waited for the usual crowd to disperse, then walked toward Rachel, who was talking to a few board members. I hung back, pretending to be preoccupied with my phone, but my ears were tuned to every word she said. Finally, the crowd thinned, and it was just me and Rachel. She didn't seem to notice me approaching until I stood right in front of her. "Jack," she said with a tight smile, her tone more dismissive than cordial, "what can I do for you?" I kept my tone casual, leaning against the wall. "I just wanted to talk to you about the flagpole again, Rachel. I know things have gotten heated, but I thought we could clear the air." She crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. "What exactly is there to clear up? The rules are the rules. You've already been fined. You don't like it? Too bad." I couldn't help but smile. She was getting defensive already. Exactly what I'd been waiting for. "See, that's the thing. I don't mind rules, but I think we both know that some of these rules, well, they don't apply to everyone." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of confusion passing through her expression. "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath, knowing I had to tread carefully. I've done some research, Rachel, and I think you might have some explaining to do. Your HOA has been in trouble before, hasn't it? Overstepping its boundaries, targeting people unfairly. Rachel's posture stiffened and she glanced around as if looking for an escape. I don't know what you're implying, Jack. This isn't the time for accusations. I kept my voice steady, leaning in just a little. I think it's exactly the time. You've been playing by your own rules, Rachel, and I think it's time the community knew exactly what kind of power trip you're on. She didn't respond immediately, her lips pressing into a tight line. I could see the anger bubbling up beneath the surface. That was exactly what I wanted to see. She was starting to lose her cool. She took a deep breath, finally speaking with a forced calmness. You think you've got me, don't you? Fine, but know this. Nothing will change. I'll do whatever it takes to keep this neighborhood in line. You're out of your depth, Jack. And just like that, the trap was set. I didn't need her to say anything more. I had everything I needed to move forward. The next few days were a blur of meetings, calls, and strategy sessions. With the tape of my conversation with Rachel in hand, I felt the tide shifting in my favor. The pieces were finally falling into place, and I wasn't about to back down now. I could feel Rachel's tightening grip on the neighborhood. But it wasn't just a fight for me anymore. This was bigger. It was about standing up to someone who thought they could control everything, even things that didn't belong to them. Clara, the lawyer, was methodical as always. She sifted through the evidence, including the permit, the zoning laws, and now the recording of Rachel's own words. This could break the case wide open, she said one morning after listening to the tape for the 5th time. Rachel's arrogance is her biggest mistake. She thinks she can bulldoze over anyone who stands in her way. I nodded, my jaw clenched with resolve. We can't let her get away with it. This isn't just about the flagpole anymore. It's about what she's done to everyone here. Lena had been an unwavering presence through all of this. She'd kept her distance, choosing not to go to the HOA meetings or stir up the usual drama. But now, she was in. She'd sent an anonymous letter to a few neighbors, including some who had been silent, urging them to show up in support. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get a few people talking. If Rachel had thought she could run this place like her personal kingdom, she was about to find out how wrong she was. The day of the court hearing, I couldn't shake the tightness in my chest. It wasn't fear, exactly, but the pressure of everything hanging on this moment. The house, the neighborhood, the flagpole, everything my grandfather had fought for felt like it was at stake. I kept reminding myself it wasn't just about winning, it was about doing the right thing. When we walked into the courthouse, I had a brief moment of doubt. The place felt cold, sterile. Everything was stark white and unforgiving. Clara led me to a small room off to the side. Lena was already there, her arms crossed tightly, the same quiet resolve in her eyes that had been there from the beginning. She didn't speak much, but she didn't need to. I could see in her face that she understood what this meant. We waited in silence as the minutes ticked by. Then, the doors to the courtroom opened, and Rachel walked in with her usual confident stride, a smirk plastered on her face like she owned the place. She wasn't even trying to hide it now. The arrogance, the belief that everything was hers to control. I stood up straighter. She may have been walking in like she'd already won, but I knew differently. It was her turn to feel the weight of what she'd done. The hearing began with formalities, papers shuffled, brief introductions, and then it was time for the arguments. Clara stepped forward first, calm and measured, presenting our case with clarity and conviction. She laid out the history of the flagpole, the state-issued permit, and the HOA's repeated violations of property rights. The evidence was solid, and the look on Rachel's face as Clara spoke made it clear she hadn't expected this kind of fight. Rachel's attorney, some slick guy I'd never seen before, took the floor next. He tried to spin the narrative, suggesting that the flagpole was a danger to the community, that it violated some vague, aesthetic guideline. But every word felt like an attempt to shift the conversation away from the real issue. That Rachel had overstepped her authority. That was the heart of the matter, and I wasn't going to let him get away with dodging it. Finally, it was my turn. I stood slowly, my legs trembling slightly beneath me. I had practiced this speech over and over in my head, but now that it was real, I wasn't sure how it would come out. I cleared my throat, looking straight at Rachel. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady but carrying. This flagpole represents more than just a piece of property. It represents the legacy of a man who fought for the freedoms we enjoy. It's a symbol of respect, of honor, and of my family's history. The HOA's actions have gone beyond enforcing guidelines. They've become a tool of control, a way to strip away the things that matter most to us. I'm here not just for a flagpole. I'm here to protect my family's dignity and our right to live freely in our own homes. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. The courtroom was silent. Rachel's face had gone rigid, her eyes burning with anger, but she didn't speak. I continued, my voice growing more confident. This isn't just my fight. This is about what happens when people are too scared to stand up for what's right. If we let her get away with this, then what's next? What other parts of our lives will she take control of? The room was still. Even Rachel seemed to be processing the weight of it. My words had hit their mark. Clara nodded from behind me, giving me a silent thumbs up. I turned back to face the judge, who had been watching intently, his face unreadable. The judge leaned forward, his voice calm but authoritative. "Thank you, Mr. Matthews. We'll recess for the day and return tomorrow with a ruling." As we left the courtroom, I felt the adrenaline crash, the tension releasing. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it was a start, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a chance. The courtroom was quiet, the tension hanging thick in the air as we waited for the judge's ruling. I could feel the sweat on my palms, my stomach twisting with nerves, but I refused to let it show. Lena stood beside me, arms crossed, her face tight with concentration. Clara, our lawyer, was reviewing the papers one last time, running through her notes as if she were preparing for battle. Her confidence was a stark contrast to the pounding in my chest. The moments ticked by slowly, almost painfully. Rachel's lawyer, who'd been speaking with too much confidence in the previous days, now sat in silence, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. Even Rachel, who had been so sure of herself, looked less composed than she had the first time we met. She wasn't speaking, she wasn't even looking at me, and for the first time I could see it, she was starting to unravel. After what seemed like an eternity, the judge finally entered the room. He took a seat at the bench, and the air seemed to shift with his presence. Everyone in the room fell silent as he scanned the paperwork before him. I could feel the weight of his gaze as he glanced briefly at me, then back to the papers. "Mr. Matthews, Miss Carter," he began, his voice calm but firm, "I've reviewed all the evidence presented in this case. The arguments, the evidence, and the legal precedents have been carefully considered." He paused, looking at Rachel's side of the room, then at ours. "This is not a matter of personal preference or aesthetic choice. This case is about property rights, state law, and the power of the HOA. Rachel shifted in her seat, her eyes now narrowed with frustration. She had been so sure that her position was untouchable. I could feel her irritation radiating across the room. But I didn't flinch. I wasn't the one on trial anymore. The judge continued. "The law is clear. Mr. Matthews holds the right to display the flagpole on his property, given the state-issued permit. The HOA's attempts to enforce its guidelines in this situation have overstepped its boundaries. I am ruling in favor of Mr. Matthews. The fine is hereby annulled, and the flagpole shall remain." I could barely contain myself. It was happening. It was really happening. I felt the knot in my stomach loosen as the weight of the ruling settled over me. I could see Lena's smile out of the corner of my eye, a quiet nod of approval from Clara, but for a moment, I just stood there, staring at the judge, making sure I wasn't imagining it. Rachel's expression was unreadable for a second, almost as if she couldn't process the loss. But then the anger came, sharp and fast. She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair back. "This isn't over," she snapped, glaring at the judge, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You'll regret this. The HOA will never let this go. You'll see." The judge didn't flinch. "This case is closed, Ms. Carter. You may leave." For a moment, Rachel just stood there, her hands clenched into fists, but then she stormed out of the courtroom, her heels clicking furiously against the floor. The tension in the room lifted the moment she was gone, replaced by a calm relief that I hadn't expected to feel so soon. As the judge prepared to leave, he gave me a brief nod. "Congratulations, Mr. Matthews. This has been a long and hard-fought battle. You're free to go." Lena reached out and slapped me on the back. "We did it," she said, her voice full of disbelief. I looked over at Clara, who was smiling more widely than I had seen her in days. It wasn't just the legal win. It was the relief of knowing that this part of the fight was over. We walked out of the courtroom together, the weight of the ruling settling in, and I couldn't stop smiling. "You know, I wasn't sure this would work," I said, turning to Lena. She laughed. "Yeah, well, you're not alone there, but damn, it feels good to see Rachel finally lose." I took a deep breath, watching the sunlight flood into the hallway as we stepped outside. I felt lighter, freer, like a burden I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. But as I looked up, I knew this wasn't just about the flagpole anymore. It wasn't about a petty fight with the HOA. It was about standing up for what was right. It was about the fact that a community, when it pulls together, has the power to take back control from those who try to bully and manipulate. It wasn't just my victory, it was ours, and somehow that made it all the sweeter. What do you think? Did Jack finally get the justice he deserved, or is Rachel going to find a way to come back swinging? What would you have done in his shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more updates. The story isn't over yet, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The relief I felt after the ruling was short-lived. The weight of it was still there, heavy in my chest, but now it was different. It wasn't about the victory. It was about what came next. What Rachel would do, how the neighbors would respond, and what this would mean for the community. I couldn't just walk away from this, not when I knew there was still a chance that Rachel could stir up more trouble. It didn't take long for the HOA to try to rally. The phone calls started the very next day, mostly from neighbors who had stayed quiet during the fight but were now eager to talk about what the court ruling meant for the neighborhood. There were some who were thankful for my stand, who felt vindicated, but others, those who had always avoided confrontation, had a different opinion. I was sitting at the kitchen table when Tony stopped by, looking uncomfortable. He didn't sit right away, just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring out the window at the flagpole. "I didn't think it would actually happen," he said after a long pause. "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning back in my chair, crossing my arms. "I thought Rachel would win," he muttered. "Honestly, I was just trying to keep my head down. I didn't want to be the one caught in the middle of everything." I could hear the hesitation in his voice, the same uncertainty I'd seen in so many others. They didn't want trouble, they just wanted peace, and who could blame them? But peace at the cost of standing up for what's right wasn't peace at all. "You don't have to apologize, Tony," I said, sitting up straight. "You don't owe me anything. But if this fight means something to you, if you want things to change around here, then you've got to stand up too. You've got to speak out." Tony glanced over at me, his expression conflicted. "I'm not the kind of guy who makes noise. I don't know if I can do that." I shook my head slowly. "You don't have to fight in the front lines, but if everyone stays quiet, Rachel wins again. This is your neighborhood too, Tony. If not now, when?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gave a tight nod before heading out the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts. He wasn't ready yet. Not today, anyway. The next few days felt like a strange kind of limbo. The court ruling was a victory, but it was only the beginning of the fallout. Rachel wasn't the type to just accept defeat. She had too much pride and too much power. When the HOA board meeting came around, I knew it wasn't just about the flagpole anymore. Rachel had been humiliated in court, but I could tell she was plotting something. This wasn't going to be the end. I walked into the meeting room, my steps steady. The room was filled with the usual faces, some people I recognized from the neighborhood, others who just came to observe. And then there was Rachel, standing at the front, her posture stiff, her eyes scanning the room like she owned it. She didn't even acknowledge me when I walked in. The chairwoman called the meeting to order, and the familiar round of pleasantries began. I sat quietly, waiting for the inevitable. I could see Rachel's frustration building. Her back was stiff, her hands pressed tightly against the podium. She wasn't going to let this go. Finally, the time came. She stood up, her voice sharp. "We have a situation in this neighborhood," she said, her eyes flicking over the group. "A flagpole has become a symbol of defiance, of disrespect for the rules. And now we have a situation where we have to decide, are we going to allow this kind of behavior to continue?" My heart rate kicked up a notch. I knew this was coming, but hearing it aloud felt different. She wasn't talking about a flagpole anymore, she was talking about me. "I'm calling for a vote," Rachel continued, her voice louder now, full of authority. "We need to decide if we are going to stand by the rules of this HOA and maintain the integrity of this community, or if we're going to let one person, one man, destroy the values we've worked so hard to uphold." I stood up slowly, cutting through the tension in the room. "You're not talking about rules anymore, Rachel," I said, my voice steady but firm. You're talking about control. You want to dictate every part of our lives, and I'm not going to let you." The room fell silent. Everyone was watching now, waiting for what would happen next. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, some of them waiting to see if I would back down. Rachel's face turned red. She gritted her teeth, her hands shaking. "You're going to regret this, Jack. You think this is over, but it's just beginning. You've made this personal. And you'll see, I always win." I stepped forward, my voice low but resolute. "Not this time." The silence in the room was deafening. No one spoke. Rachel's glare was sharp enough to cut, but I stood my ground, refusing to flinch. It wasn't about winning the argument anymore. It was about setting the tone for the future, showing everyone in that room that standing up for what's right wasn't a battle, it was a necessity. Rachel stormed out of the room, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. But I could see the cracks now. The power she'd once held was slipping, piece by piece, until it was nothing but a hollow shell. I turned to face the room. This isn't just about the flagpole. It's about our right to live the way we want. It's time we take back control. For the first time, I saw some of the neighbors nodding. A few even stood up. The tide was turning. The battle wasn't over, but it felt like a new chapter had started. The tension in the room was palpable. Rachel hadn't just stormed out of the HOA meeting. She'd left a trail of hostility behind her, the kind of energy that filled the air like smoke. For the first time, I could feel the power shift. What had once been an unchallenged grip on the neighborhood was beginning to slip. The quiet nods from the neighbors, the hesitant glances, they were all adding up. It wasn't over, not yet, but I wasn't going to let Rachel get away with this, not when so much was at stake. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and subtle whispers behind closed doors. The HOA had called for a special meeting, but this time it wasn't just about the flagpole. It was about everything Rachel had done to manipulate the community, to control the way people lived. It was about holding her accountable for the damage she'd caused. This time, I wasn't just fighting for my property, I was fighting for everyone who had been too afraid to speak out. I stood at the back of the room when the meeting started, my eyes scanning the crowd. There were more people here than I'd expected. Neighbors who'd been too quiet in the past were now showing up, some with clear defiance in their posture. Others were still hesitant, unsure of where the wind was blowing. But the energy in the room was different. This wasn't just a meeting anymore. It was a reckoning. Rachel took her usual position at the front, her eyes darting around the room with that same sharp, calculating look. She was trying to project calm, but there was a tremor in her voice when she spoke. It was subtle, but I noticed it. The cracks were widening. "I called this meeting because we need to address the situation," Rachel began, her tone sharp. "There are still people in this neighborhood who are defying the rules, who think they're above the law. We cannot let this slide." A murmur went through the crowd, and I saw a few people exchange glances. I could feel the shift happening, but I knew Rachel wasn't going to give up that easily. She'd use her position, her power, to try and regain control. I stood up slowly, the weight of the moment settling in. Every eye in the room turned toward me. For a moment, there was a heartbeat of silence, and I felt the weight of the entire neighborhood on my shoulders. But this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the whole community. "Rachel, you've had control for far too long," I said, my voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've manipulated the rules, ignored the law, and pushed people around. And for what? To make yourself feel powerful? This isn't about a flagpole, it's about control, and it's time someone stood up to you." I could see the anger flash in Rachel's eyes, but she didn't interrupt. She wasn't used to this kind of defiance, but she was trying to keep her cool. I didn't plan to give her any more space to maneuver. "You think the rules are all that matters," I continued, "but it's not about the rules anymore. It's about what happens when someone uses the rules to crush the very people they're supposed to protect. You've hurt this community, Rachel, and people are done being afraid of you." Rachel opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to waste it. "You've made it clear that you only care about your version of this neighborhood," I went on, my voice growing stronger. "But I'm here to tell you something. This neighborhood belongs to all of us, and that's why we're not backing down." I turned toward the group of neighbors who had gathered in the room. I could see some of them nodding, others standing straighter, their fear starting to fade. They were beginning to see the truth of what I was saying, that this wasn't just about one person's fight. It was about all of us. "Rachel," I said, locking eyes with her, "this isn't just a legal battle, it's a moral one, and you've lost." The silence in the room was deafening. Rachel's face was contorted with rage, but there was nothing she could say now. The crowd was shifting, the tide had turned, and Rachel knew it. Her grip on this neighborhood was slipping faster than she could control. One by one, the neighbors started to speak. A few offered quiet support for me, expressing their relief that someone had finally stood up. Others were still hesitant, but their voices weren't as uncertain as before. The weight of the truth had begun to sink in. This wasn't about compliance with petty rules. It was about standing up to someone who had abused their position for far too long. Rachel's voice cut through the growing murmurs. "You think you've won?" she spat, her face red with frustration. "This isn't over. You haven't seen the last of me." But I wasn't afraid. She was angry. That was a good sign. It meant she was losing control. "No, Rachel," I said, my voice calm but firm. "This is over. You've lost, and you won't be back." The room erupted into murmurs of approval, and even those who had stayed silent before were now speaking up. Rachel stood there, a shadow of her former self, her posture deflated. For the first time, she looked small. She stormed out of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, but it didn't matter. The battle was won. The community had stood up, and Rachel's reign was over. I turned to face the room, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. "We did it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This neighborhood is ours again." The neighborhood felt different now. The air was lighter, almost electric, like something had shifted and people were finally starting to breathe again. Rachel's departure had been a slow burn, a long, drawn-out unraveling that ended in the kind of quiet that made her fury seem small, almost laughable. The community she'd once controlled was now rising, stronger than it had been before. The days after the meeting were full of change. Neighbors who'd been silent or hesitant were stepping up, finding their voices, reclaiming their space. It wasn't just about the flagpole anymore. It wasn't even just about me. It was about the realization that no one should feel powerless, that even in small corners of the world, people could make a difference. It was about showing that standing up for what was right didn't have to be a solitary fight. I sat on the porch one evening, watching the flagpole in the distance. It wasn't just a piece of metal and fabric. It was more than that. It had become a symbol of defiance, yes, but also of resilience, of legacy. My grandfather's legacy. And somehow that made the fight worth it. It wasn't about the small battles, it was about what we left behind, the truths we stood for, the values we passed on. Lena had come by earlier that day to check in, her smile a little wider than it used to be. She was different now, too. The quiet, reserved woman who had stayed on the sidelines was now more than just a neighbor. She was part of the change. Her own strength had emerged through this, and I could see it in the way she carried herself. She'd found a new voice, one that wasn't afraid to speak up. We weren't just a team, we were a part of something bigger now. When the final paperwork arrived, showing that the fine was officially rescinded and the HOA would have no further claim over the flagpole, I felt a sense of closure, not just in the legal sense, but emotionally. It was over, Rachel had lost, and the victory wasn't just mine, it was the community's. That evening I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. It had changed in the past few weeks, not just physically, but in the energy, in the way people interacted. I passed by the homes of neighbors who had been so wary, so afraid to speak out before. Now they greeted me with small smiles, waves, even friendly nods. People were coming together in a way they hadn't before, and it felt right. I stopped in front of Tony's house, unsure of how to approach him. He hadn't said much after our talk during the meeting, but I knew he'd been watching. He was a quiet observer, but I could tell that something had shifted in him, too. He was sitting on his porch when I walked up, looking up at the flagpole. Without a word, he stood, holding out his hand to shake mine. "I didn't think you could do it," he said quietly, his voice carrying a mix of respect and gratitude. "But I see it now. You didn't just fight for your flag, you fought for all of us, and I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner." I took his hand, shaking it firmly. "You don't have to apologize, Tony. I just did what had to be done. It's never easy, but it's worth it." He smiled, a weight lifting from his shoulders as if he'd finally found the strength to step into his own power. "I'll be more vocal next time. This neighborhood deserves better than what we've been getting." We stood there for a moment, the air cool and calm but with an undercurrent of something new, a sense of possibility. I knew it wasn't going to be perfect. That change takes time, but for the first time, it felt like things were moving in the right direction. Later that night, I sat down at the kitchen table with Lena. We didn't need to say much. We both knew how much had been accomplished, how far we had come. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice soft but certain. "But we've started something, and maybe, just maybe, other people will see that they can do the same." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle in. We made our stand. And that's what matters. I guess the fight wasn't just about the flagpole. It was about standing up for our right to exist as we are, to protect what's ours. Lena smiled, a quiet but contented smile. And now, it's about making sure no one forgets what happens when people refuse to be controlled. I looked out the window, the flag gently waving in the breeze, my grandfather's legacy in full view. It wasn't just about the victory anymore. It was about the way we carried ourselves, the way we treated each other. It was about ensuring that the values we fought for weren't lost, that the stories we told and the history we carried were never erased. Because in the end, that's what really matters, what we leave behind. Sometimes it takes just one voice to break the silence, I thought, looking at the flag. It wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was a reminder that standing up, no matter the odds, always makes a difference. How has your own community changed after standing up to the rules that were wrong? Share your thoughts in the comments, or tell us where you're watching from. Your story could inspire someone else to take that first step toward making a change.